My name is Paul Cullinane. I'm one of the many community volunteers here in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. We're on Memorial Square, and we're looking at the primary or centerpiece icon of the borough of Chambersburg, our memorial fountain. The memorial fountain really had its start following the Civil War. Chambersburg was invaded 3 times, in 1862, 1863, and 1864, culminating in the Great Fire, or the burning of Chambersburg. We know that from 1878, the women of Chambersburg, over a series of years, raised the money, got the support to purchase a fountain. They didn't want a military fountain in appearance. They wanted one that represented the rise from the ashes. They wanted one that was beautiful, that future generations could admire. And in 1878, they purchased the fountain that you see before you. This fountain was designed and intended to honor the soldiers who fought during the Civil War and died during the Civil War, of course, which was 1861 to 1865. On the side of the fountain, you see a soldier. That soldier is there to symbolically protect this town from Southern invasion going forward. In 1893, the town placed a large granite stone in front of Central Presbyterian Church. And that was to bring attention to the fact that Chambersburg was the largest northern town that was burned during the Civil War. With the burning of Chambersburg, it dramatically changed the landscape of this community. And we see on that stone that the economic devastation of Chambersburg resulted in, of course, the fire that started at 8 o'clock in the morning and was done by 11, covered an 11-block area. 2,000 people lost their homes, 537 buildings were destroyed. And when you consider not only the real estate, but the personal property that was lost, it was well over $1 million in value. Another aspect of architecture in this community are the crossroads. Memorial Fountain sits on the junction of US Route 11, which runs from northern New York to New Orleans, Louisiana, and east and west from East Coast to West Coast. And at that time, in 1918, Chambersburg was considered the crossroads of America, and it was also referred to as the Queen City. There is also a reference to Route 30, which runs east and west, as the Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway runs from New York City to San Francisco, and in Pennsylvania, from Adams County to Westmoreland County, a 6-county area, it's referred to as the Lincoln Highway Heritage Corridor, one of the many heritage corridors in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Central Presbyterian Church has a Gothic-style architecture, and it was constructed in 1868, but in 1939 they had a tragic fire and the church had to be reconstructed. One of the interesting things about that church, as is so much the case in churches throughout the town, is it has a 186-foot tall steeple. Now, when you look at churches in Chambersburg, you're going to see tall steeples and pointy spires and cupolas that, and other government buildings have similar cupola styles. One of the main features of most churches, and certainly is the case with Central Presbyterian Church, is the stained glass windows. Now, the stained glass construction is a little different than traditional stained glass windows. It is called Fraville, F-R-A-V-I-L-E, and the coloration is actually manufactured into the glass. You're looking at a set of buildings, 7 buildings, referred to as Townhouse Row. And those 7 buildings were placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And they were rebuilt after the Great Fire. And what you see there, the architectural style of those buildings is 3-story bracketed commercial and residential structure. And what's common about those buildings is the roof line. you have a continuous roof line, and the cornice that's just below the roof line is designed in such a way that it represents the construction by different contractors. And you see elements of lintels and sills and recessed doorways that are very common to that particular style of architecture. And what is also common about those buildings and other buildings along Main Street is the painted brick. That was purposely done with colors that were popular at the time. So each building would have a different color, as well as the different features on the windows and doorways. The water wheel is not historic, but it does represent the type of water wheel that was very common in this area, starting with Chambers and development of his homestead and the use of the water wheel for gristmill and sawmill to help the development of the town, to create lumber, to create the food necessary. And in the post-Civil War era, we see many mills and water wheels developing along both the Falling Spring Creek and the Conococheague Creek. We are standing actually at the confluence of the two streams. The Falling Spring Creek is a 5-mile limestone-based stream that stays 50 degrees year-round and is considered the best trout fishing stream in Pennsylvania. This is the Founding Family Memorial Statue, and it represents the homecoming. To explain that, this statue is the founder of the town, Benjamin Chambers. This is his son, Colonel James Chambers, and this is James's son, Benjamin, the grandson of the founder. Now, when George Washington put out a call for militia units to come help his colonial forces, this young man was 11 years old. And so he picked up arms, and with his father, they joined Thompson's Rifle Battalion in Carlisle, and then marched the 450 miles to Boston. And they served alongside Washington during the siege of Boston and in all of the campaigns north to Canada and back. And so they, at that point, by 1781, they have fought in 6 of the 8 years of the Revolutionary War, and now they have returned. So the homecoming brings them back to young Benjamin, who is now 17 years old, to his mother and grandmother and the grandfather. We are standing next to the Franklin County Judicial Center, which actually was finished in 2021. And it represents a contemporary style, modern architecture, but it also represents the fact that, like any community, the growth of its judicial capability increases with the growth of the community. Behind me is the historic Franklin County Courthouse. The land on which this courthouse sits was gifted by Benjamin Chambers in those early days. And this is the third version of the courthouse. First one was built in 1792, and then as the need occurred for it to be enlarged for more capacity, it was rebuilt in 1842. Now, the Great Fire of 1864, of course, leveled this building, and it was reconstructed in 1865 as you see it here. One of the interesting things of this courthouse are the 6 columns in front. Originally, before the fire, the building had the white columns facing the main road, Lincoln Way. But after the burning, they reconstructed it, and the 6 columns faced in a westerly direction. One of the interesting points about those columns is at the top. The materials on what we call the capitals, the top of those columns, was made out of terracotta. Now, terracotta was only available for contractors from about the mid-1840s to the end of the Civil War. So right now there's a lot of architectural interest and architects coming from different parts of the country to look at these columns and look at that terracotta as a very interesting architectural style. One of the other interesting features about this courthouse, if you look at the top on the cupola of the courthouse, you're going to see a statue. That's a statue of Benjamin Franklin. And this, of course, went from Cumberland County to Franklin County. That statue is 9 feet tall, and he's carrying a lightning rod. The one that's up there was burned during the Civil War in 1865, and when it was rebuilt, the second version of it was out of wood, and it gradually deteriorated. And so a group of local craftsmen, they took it down, and for several years they worked on restoring it. And the restored version of that statue of Benjamin Franklin resides in the Chambersburg Heritage Center across the street. The one that's on top of the building now is made out of synthetic materials that will be able to stand the test of time and the elements that placed havoc on the earlier version. This is the Chambersburg Heritage Center. Its architectural style is American modernism of the Gilded Age. This building was built in 1915 as the Valley National Bank, and you can still see the outline of the letters on the corner of the building. It was designed and constructed by Frank Furness from Philadelphia. He was a famed architect who was very controversial in the styles of buildings that he built in various cities. And he was criticized heavily in the early years, especially after he passed on, because the style of the buildings that he built and designed were different from the architecture of the adjacent buildings. But this building has had great use from a bank. It was used temporarily and really was out of service for a number of years until it was purchased by the Chambersburg Area Development Corporation in 1999 and gradually restored. Historic preservation at its best, actually, and the Chamber of Commerce was able to locate the Heritage Center into that building in 2004, and they did it in that way. And it's actually connected to the newer building beside it, the David G. Shimana office building, so that the Chamber of Commerce could manage it without having to build a separate staff in it. And so today it's a heritage center that really talks about the history in 4 major thematic areas. So it talks about the early frontier history, the architectural history common throughout Franklin County, also the Civil War invasions and the Underground Railroad, and then finally the transportation elements dealing with the stagecoaches, the early roads, the railroad, and of course the Lincoln Highway Heritage Corridor. After the July 30th, 1864 burning of Chambersburg, the town rapidly began reconstruction in 1865. And looking down South Main Street, the architectural style is considered late Victorian. And the roof lines, the continuous roof lines and the cornices have an Italianate decorative feature. And they're bracketed with panels in between. And the notable architectural style is Carpenter's art. Carpenter's art showed the public which carpenter actually constructed each individual building, because they put their own style on the, principally those were features over the windows called the lintels, and the window sills underneath. When you look at the roof line and the cornice, you see brackets and you see panels in between those Italianate style brackets. Now the buildings were brick, but they were all purposely painted, and each building was typically painted a different color, just like North Main Street. Continuing down South Main Street, you had that attractive colorization of the buildings. We're looking at the Franklin County Visitor Center. This is a Greek Revival style building, and it was burned during the Civil War and reconstructed, changed along the way after the burning to a neoclassical style, and then changed again, which is kind of unusual for post-burning construction, to this Greek Revival style. The Visitor Center was repurposed in 2018 as a central place like the Heritage Center, where visitors could come and better understand not only the community or the county, the broader county, but also a number of cultural events are held within that building. So the floors are marble, all of the wood features are still retained, and the entire building was restored in an historic preservation fashion. So it really has become one of our architectural treasures in the community. We're on South Main Street in downtown Chambersburg, and you recall the burning of Chambersburg on July 30th, 1864. Most all of the buildings on North and South Main Street were burned, with the exception of the 3 buildings behind me. As you look at the yellow building, that has a colonial architectural style. That's the original look of that building before the burning of Chambersburg. The next 2 buildings behind me, including the red brick castle-looking building, those were not burned, but what they did is they added to the facade and the rest of the building by increasing the front to 3 stories and the entire building to follow. So there are exceptions to the burning, and as we said before, that burning took place on the morning of July 30th, 1864, and it covered 11 square blocks. We're looking at the historic Capitol Theater. It was constructed and opened its doors on February 3rd, 1927. Architectural style, Art Deco. In more recent times, by 2003, the Cultural Arts Center was developed as an extension of the Capitol Theater further to the south. So the 3 buildings adjacent to the Capitol Theater are part of that whole Cultural Arts Center complex. And we tried to match the buildings, the newer buildings, with the buildings that were there at one time that were badly deteriorated. So on the outside, it looks like the continuous street wall that is common in Main Street, but inside, what you find is that the 1927 Art Deco style is carried from the old part of the theater into the new part of the theater, so it all flows very well. One of the main features of the Capitol Theater Center and the Capitol Theater from 1927 is, of course, the inside decor, part of that Art Deco decor. It has a Moeller theater pipe organ that has been in use since the theater was open. And this theater, of course, did the silent movies, the talkies, came along, and of course now is a performing arts type facility with a lot of functions for cultural arts and theatrical performances throughout the course of the year. So it's been in continuous use since it opened in 1927. This is the Susserat House, owned by Dr. Susserat. It was built in 1807 and has a Flemish bond architectural style. And you'll see the buildings just to the south of it that are connected, and that's what we call a continuous bond architectural style. And that actually now is all part of that same building because it's an apartment complex today. There is some retail on the first floor. It still has that Italianate style, and on the cornices has the carpenter's art on the face of the buildings. But this is where the fire line actually stopped. And as the story goes, the women in that building came out, convinced the Confederate soldiers not to burn the building, and they didn't. Behind me is the Borough of Chambersburg office building. The borough was chartered in 1803. In 1831, this building was used as a market house. So it had wooden awnings that came out of 2 sides, the 2 facing sides, And this is where people would gather their market produce and other products that they would need. And it stayed that way right up past 1921. And this has Greek Revival architectural style, and the borough actually began to utilize this facility for its offices in about 1930 and finished occupying the building in 1945. Featured on the top of the borough building is the cupola, and there are clock faces on 4 sides of the cupola, and they were installed in 1832. And most recently they were refreshed and refurbished so that they're once again not only the clock but the cupola itself and its copper top are now once again exposed to the public. This building is called the Rose Rent Lofts, but back in 1697 the building on land gifted by Benjamin Chambers was constructed into the Chambersburg Academy. And then some years later it was converted to Central High School, and additions to the building and a new building out on Queen Street were added for the increased capacity, and that was called the Central High School. Well, when the new Central High School was constructed, this changed its name to the Central Junior High School. But today it is the Rose Rent Loft. So what the developer did is they totally restored the entire building. This part is high-end apartments. The middle was taken out, and then the Queen Street part has been repurposed because it has an auditorium and a gymnasium, and it has office spaces. So it's used for educational purposes as well as some business purposes. One of the interesting things about the Rose Rent Lofts, nothing to do with the Rose Rent churches, but land that was gifted by Benjamin Chambers, is when they went in there to do the restoration, they found, as they started taking out temporary walls, they found the chalkboards from Central Junior High School that still have the chalk writing on it by the teachers and the students. They preserved that, and they built that into the actual architecture of the apartments now within this building. Pretty cool, and it's just another way to pay respect and honor to the history that went before. This is the historic John Brown house. Actually was Mary Rittner's boarding house. John Brown was very enamored with Chambersburg and this location, and he temporarily stayed here to prepare for his unsuccessful raid on Harper's Ferry. The railroad was right behind him, so he was bringing in by night arms and ammunition and supplies through the railroad to help him get ready for that fateful attempt to overtake Harper's Ferry. One of the Rittner family members would hide freedom seekers in the rail cars. So this was really part of the Underground Railroad as well. We're looking at the Franklin County Old Jail. This is the finest architecture, Georgian style, from Williamsburg north to here. This jail was constructed in 1818. The part you're looking at a little bit further around the corner is the 1880 portion of the jail, the top floor of which was used for women prisoners. It has a large walled exercise yard. It actually has a gallows in it. This jail was used from 1818 to 1971. And so it's a long, continuous usage of a jail. Local lore has it that freedom seekers would come here and be hidden in the basement of the old jail, but that's never been substantiated. This is the library building, the Coyle Library, and it is neoclassical in architectural style. It was built in 1891 as the U.S. Post Office, and in later years was converted, repurposed to be the Coyle Library. In recent times, in 2017, it was totally renovated with a new addition to be an expanded library. And so it has 3 levels of library services, double the size of the library, and it preserved all of the original marble and wood features inside. And on the top floor, it has a live garden outside, and so environmentally, a lot of plants are grown up there, and you can sit out there and enjoy a great view down Main Street. Thank you very much for visiting downtown Chambersburg and the greater borough of Chambersburg area. And we appreciate your listening to the story that emanated out of the historic founding of this town, the Great Fire that decimated the town but was quickly reborn. If you have any interest, we hope that you'll come back to town sometime. You can get a hold of the Franklin County Visitor Center online, and you can see a lot of programs that are available. The Chambersburg Heritage Center is also available to help you understand the town and other parts of the Franklin County. So thank you again. We enjoyed spending time with you.